See how this works better. If I can talk louder, if I need to use this microphone, we'll start with the microphone and go from there. Thanks for coming out today. Appreciate that. We're going to discuss today some differences about brand name medications and generic medications. I'm a pharmacist. I've been here for about 9 months at this location. I've worked in pharmacies since 2002 overall. Been a pharmacist for about 15 years now as well, across a variety of roles and different positions and places. So most of my time I spent in a retail pharmacy. So this is something I'm fairly familiar with and dealt with on a regular basis throughout my career so far. Be available afterwards for some questions as well. So if anything strikes you along the way, you can either use the notepad they've given you with a pen there, and I can answer them on the fly, or you can raise your hand as we go along as well, and I can try and answer at that point in time too. First things first, we're going to talk about brand name medications. So a brand name medication is a name or a medication that's been manufactured by a specific manufacturer with a registered trademark name on it. Most of the time those are the ones you see on commercials, jingles on the radio or on TV as well. But they have to go through a series of tests to study that efficacy or how well it works in your body, and also establish the safety doses that they can use on a patient as well. So they go through this entire process, and the FDA has to approve or say that this is an acceptable test or acceptable results they've had, and compare those against concerns they have along with it as well. So if there's any questions on their testing process, the FDA can ask those manufacturers to go back and look at that information or test further to see if they can maybe clarify one point that the FDA has a question on. They have a patent or a patent filing that they send with the FDA, and that can last 20 years from when it's applied, depending upon any situations along with it. If it's a certain disease state they're treating or a certain condition that's going on, they may last less time for those patents. So depending upon what's going on, it can be up to 20 years, it could be a lot less depending on the situation. They also have something called exclusivity on their patents or on their product as well. It's a little bit different than patents, but it works on competition and manufacturing generics. So that can be up to 21 years depending upon the situations again, and it is mostly related to competitive manufacturing processes. They can run at the same time, or they can be separate from each other as well, but generally they're a little bit different as far as what they mean. What this means for brand name medication costs and dollar values. The research and development that goes in these medications is fairly extensive as far as the costs are concerned. Costing can vary from the studies that they run, supplies that they use for the medications themselves, and also the laboratories that they use as well, the labor for all the processes for studying and manufacturing, and also the overhead expenses. So the facilities themselves, the actual shipping of drugs around the country, the world in some situations, kind of add to that R&D or research and development for their costs. They also have the marketing and advertising campaigns that they run. A lot of the commercials you see on the TV or radio cost money, and as they use them over and over again, they still cost a lot more money. So that can add certain high dollar value to that cost side. The National Library of Medicine estimates that in 2018, the range of per drug costs were $113 million to just over $6 billion. So that's the cost to manufacture a certain drug, depending upon which drugs you're talking about. So it's a pretty wide range, but also not very cheap if you look at that as well. On the generic medication side, a little bit different. Generic medications are a substitution of a pharmaceutical equivalent and bioequivalent drug in place of the brand name medication. So they are proven to be equivalent or bioequivalent, so they work the same way in the body overall. They have the same effectiveness in the body compared to that brand name medication, and they have a pharmaceutical grade or quality and strength that matches that as well. So the right number of dose or milligrams per serving or grams per dose. Also the same overall safety concerns as well. The manufacturer has to show that production quality actually meets what the FDA requires of the brand name medication manufacturers. So they're basically saying that yes, this is a production facility that is a certified production place, and they can actually do the production the way that other manufacturers can as well. Most of the manufacturers for generics have been doing all sorts of generics already, so this process is pretty well nailed out the first time they make a medication. But it's one thing that's included in their process too. The equivalent to the brand name, the third market there, products as far as efficacy and quality goes, FDA requires that testing as well. They don't have to do the basic testing for safety doses and efficacy as far as what dose should be the accurate dose of those products, but they still have to show that it meets those standards that the FDA requires for the brand name medications as well. They're equivalent if they have the same active ingredients, the same dose form, route of administration, and strength. So if you've got a Tylenol 325 milligram tablet and the generic acetaminophen 325 milligram tablet. They're basically saying, yes, they have the same active ingredients in there. So acetaminophen is the active ingredient of both of those things. It's also done in a dosage form of a tablet or a capsule that can be generic to each other, but not to the other one. So I had capsule to capsule or tablet to tablet. Route of administration is going to be just taking it by mouth. Sometimes you have nasal sprays or inhalers or other doses you can use as well. And then it's also the same strength. So basically making sure that it's the same strength across the board between the two. And lastly, the appearance can be very different. And that's kind of a fun thing to deal with in the pharmacy on a regular basis too. A lot of times, medication may be the size of a Tic Tac, and the next time you get that medication filled again, the size of a peanut M&M. So a very large difference in size and looks. Unfortunately, it's out of our control on the pharmacy side, but the manufacturers do their best to have a consistent template for when they produce those tablets or capsules. And so each manufacturer has their own look and way to do their production process. That leads to quite a bit of confusion, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit as well. So inactive ingredients is the other part of those manufacturers doing generic medications. These are ones that don't affect the medication's actual use or therapeutic use. It's more for production in the coloring, flavoring, or binding or forming that final tablet or capsule in certain situations. And those are referred to as inactive ingredients because they don't affect that therapeutic action. So those are ones we don't worry too much about as far as comparisons go. Some examples, saccharin, gelatin, lactose, alcohol, or galactose are the kind of the ones we see most often in those tablets. When we have issues or differences in some of those coloring or flavoring, that's a lot of times what we see is they're using different binding ingredients or different agents in those processes for the different colors. And that can be what we see a lot of times in the differences in the retail level. For the generic medication, the dollar values and costs and the savings we see are we look for reductions. We used the same studies for those brand name medications that were done for safety and efficacy and the dosing. So we use the same ones for the generic manufacturers so they can save a lot of money by not having those studies performed. As they go along, they still have to do the safety studies that they're actually doing the right value compared to what the manufacturer did as well. So some of that cost is still there for that process, but it's a lot less than the initial cost of studies. The marketing is a lot less as well, or zero if anything. Most of the time those generic manufacturers are not marketing their products because it's not a brand name, it's not a household name. They're not trying to capture that name as well, but they're providing that drug name and that's it. So they can save a lot of money with advertising. There are some decreases in pricing when using a single generic manufacturer compared to 5 manufacturers. So if we have the first part of someone's patent when a brand name manufacturer goes away, and they lose their patent or exclusivity is gone, the generic manufacturer usually one manufacturer that gets the first 6 months of production that they kind of earn or are able to get, and they can produce it for 6 months by themselves. So they get the first glance or first chance at doing that first sale. That 30% decrease happens right then usually. After that 6 months is over with though, it's wide open for all the rest of the manufacturers to jump on board and produce their own versions. And that's when we see that bigger decrease of 85% decrease in costs compared to brand name medications. So it's a wide variety. It's that kind of competition drives pricing down in this world. And again, that's mostly for the generic side versus brand side. They also believe that generic drugs saved about $2 trillion for the healthcare system in the US from 2009 to 2019. That's from the FDA and IMS Health Institute's analysis from that time range. So again, that conversation really about the brand name medications and their costs for studies and advertising really increasing the cost on their side, going to generic can save a lot of money over the course of everyone's medications and health. That also goes across the entire healthcare system, whether it's insurance, hospitals, pharmacies, the whole gamut, patients as well. The other thing for cost reductions is insurance generally prefers a generic substitution, which means that the copays are lower for the patient most of the time. Sometimes there's some odd instances here and there that make a difference there, but it also generally increases that reduction in cost of the insurance for the entire year for patients as well. So if you've got a deductible to meet, or if you have a per year max out of pockets, that also affects that as well. So the less you're paying up front throughout the year, the less that you're going to chance of hitting those max out of pockets or the catastrophic coverage area as well. And the donut holes most of the time we see in Medicare too. So decreasing that's a wonderful thing. Some challenges we can see with the generic substitution. Most often a pharmacy will always default to a generic substitution if they have a chance to. It's again, it's an equivalent dosing, the same overall medication, same usage. We try to save money across the board by doing that. So most often we do it. There are some challenges when doing so, and that's some things what we have to do as a pharmacy is educate people or talk to people about this as well. The big one is provider preference. Sometimes a provider will order a medication and they'll refer to it by brand name, which is wonderful because that's what we're used to seeing it when it first comes out. They kind of talk about that brand name medication, and the patients recognize that brand name, and they come to the pharmacy asking for that brand name. Well, when the patient doesn't know is that the provider gives that name because it's quicker to say than the 14-letter name that we have on there instead. So we follow the generic and we have to make sure they understand that providers are saying that name because that's easier to say than the other ones. So we get a little education to the patient at that point in time. The next step is that patient education and understanding the difference between brand and generic. So kind of that little education of saying, yep, it's the same overall effectiveness, same safety profile, same overall use and dosing, and kind of explaining it to the patient as they come through the pharmacy for the first time. Most often when someone gets a prescription at a pharmacy, it's explained, or at least one point in time they've heard about that before, so they don't have to keep doing this every time, which is nice. But when there's a new medication that goes into a generic, we kind of give that first time saying, hey, this is now a generic instead. It may look different than last time, maybe the same, but it's a new one now in the label, so it's a generic instead, just so they're educated and knowing what's going on. Sometimes people will come up and ask the pharmacist if we're gonna get the knockoff of a medication, and they refer to generally as the generic instead. And that's okay, we understand what they mean, so we usually can just jump right in and have that conversation about what medication we're dispensing and what's going on with that medication. And sometimes people have a different perception of knockoff and they think it's not as good a quality and as safe and or effectiveness. So that conversation has to be had of saying, well, are you talking about the generic, or are you talking about maybe a lower quality product? And then understanding that this is not actually a lower quality product, it's not subpar quality, it's gonna be the same overall therapy goal that we're using, and it's more or less a naming thing for most people to understand. The previous side effects of a generic product before, whether it's a generic for a different medication that someone's had, can sometimes cause them to have a negative experience. And most of those, not most, a lot of medication side effects come from when we change manufacturer specifically, of those inactive ingredients earlier. There can be a reaction someone has to a certain inactive ingredient that causes them to have an upset stomach, or maybe it wasn't agreeing with their system overall. And we most of the time attribute that to the generic inactive ingredients. So kind of explain that this, because you had one experience with the different generic products, doesn't always mean it's the same for the next generic products you get as well. So you explain that kind of back and forth a little bit helps too. Sometimes it's a color issue or a tablet that has a certain ingredient that we can't have. If someone has an allergy to a dye, understanding what that allergy is, first off, is important for us in the pharmacy. We usually make a note in the file, and we're looking for, let's say, if it can have a red tablet because of a red allergy, we'll make sure all the medications we're getting or dispensing to those people are not carrying that red dye in their product as well. So kind of an explanation and kind of a conversation we have with our patients to understand what's going on. Another challenge we have is consistent supplies. There's been a few different manufacturers that have gone through a large recall or a back order production issue. They've had facilities shut down in the last several years. So a lot of medications in particular are unavailable for us to purchase in the pharmacy level. Makes it challenging for us, but also challenging for the patients, right? We don't want that to happen. Patients don't want that to happen, but those are the challenges we see in the marketplace. When one manufacturer goes down or loses their supply for a while, all the other manufacturers' supplies go through a lot faster because everybody else still order those products, and we have an issue getting the consistent supply in stock. So sometimes you see a lot more variation in that appearance we talked about earlier on a regular basis too. So it might be that one month it's a white tablet that's the size of, let's say, a grain of rice. Next month it might be an orange tablet that's half that size, or vice versa. And it can bounce back and forth often enough, unfortunately, too, depending upon which manufacturer is available to us as well. So that's one of our challenges. We try and navigate that through. Most often the pharmacies will try and keep the same manufacturers in stock or the same product in stock for consistency's sake and for the patient's sake to follow along at home. But sometimes we can't do anything about that either. Another challenge with these generic medications are narrow therapeutic index medications. That's science talk for very tight medications that can't be changed too frequently or too much. So specific medications are levothyroxine or Synthroid, warfarin or Coumadin, some anti-seizure medications as well. Those medications have very, very small dosing changes on their products themselves, and that can lead to changes on the blood work or labs that we draw afterwards. So trying to be consistent as possible with those medications specifically on manufacturers is what we try and do in the pharmacy side. So we're not dosing or chasing that number in the lab a lot. Sometimes manufacturers for levothyroxine will go through a market withdrawal for their entire product line, so we switch manufacturers over to a different manufacturer, and their lab values for those TSH or the thyroid stimulating hormone can go up or down depending upon that change as well. The biggest thing is consistency with those medications specifically, so we try and maintain that as well. Some days we can't, and it's a challenge for us as well as it is for the patients. We don't want to do that again if we don't have to, but some days we can't do anything about that. It's also challenging when people move from a different area to a different pharmacy, and that pharmacy uses a different line entirely, so it's a challenge to kind of explain that difference and how This is the one we have going forward. And once we get on that kind of that same medication pathway, it usually balances out that number as we go along. Another challenge we see most often nowadays is that insurance coverage, brand or generic preference. Most medications, the insurance, like I said before, the insurance prefers a generic medication. There are some instances where the insurance prefers a brand name version. Without going too far into that rabbit hole, there's different reasons why that is. But most often, we fill whatever the insurance will allow as well. Sometimes there's cost savings with the generic. Sometimes it's more cost effective to go through the brand depending upon the insurance formulary and their cost savings. Sometimes it's more cost effective to go without the insurance itself. It all depends on the situation. But we have to work with those situations that come up and have a conversation with patients usually about what's going on and ask them what the patient wants to do. Best we can. Sometimes it's a non-negotiable deal with the insurance company, so it's a mess. So with generic medications, what does it mean for me? In general, like I said, pharmacies dispense generic every time if we can. It's always the goal. It's cost savings across the board for the patients, the pharmacies, and the insurance side. Some medications don't have a brand name available anymore. Some of them are very, very old. They don't make a brand name version. Several of the medications I was seeing in 2002 or 2003 that were a brand name haven't been brand name since, and I haven't seen a brand name on a shelf since. So depending upon what's going on, what the manufacturers are doing, they may no longer make those medications. It means that it's going to be a safe, effective medication as well. So we're making sure that the patients understand that this is a substitution based on efficacy. Still, the important part is the efficacy portion. Cost is not as important as efficacy or safety, so we go for that portion first. Understanding the labels is also very important for the patients at home. There's going to be some what I call alphabet soup, so those really, really long drug names. If you take the drug HCTZ, you might know what I'm talking about. It's hydrochlorothiazide. It's a very long label, very long name, and has a lot of letters on there. Not easy to pronounce. Most of the time, brand name medications have great names that they can pronounce easier, but they also get paid money to make those names up. So the chemical names are a lot more science-based and based on how the chemical is structured, so it's a little bit different process for the naming for it. So you might see a change in the labeling at some point in time if we go from a brand name medication to generic. The other thing is physical descriptions are on labels themselves as well now. So if you're looking at a medication saying this looks different than last time, well, I'm not sure this is the right drug or not. There's actually a label, a portion on the label that tells you what the drug will look like, and the color, shape, and imprint is on there as well. So you'll have an understanding, okay, if I look at my tablet, does it match this description? Yes, it does. Okay, so this is the right product in here. Whether or not it's the right one they prescribed is a separate issue, but that's also verified too. But the big thing is that you'll have a sticker on there or a note on the label that says this is what it should look like. If there's a change in manufacturers, a lot of times they'll try and throw a green sticker on there saying this is the same medication you've been getting, size, color, shape may be different than last time. That's just a little visual cue to say, hey, this might look different than last time. Don't be alarmed. You can always give the pharmacy a call and say, hey, can you verify this for me real quick? Always happy to do so. Much rather have you more feel comfortable at home than not take it at all. So please give a call to the pharmacy if you're concerned. And again, we try and always put the sticker on there. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get busy and miss those stickers too from the pharmacy side. So insurance formulary is also one thing that can affect our dispensing like we talked about before. The preferred medication list is what we say is if you can get used to that or know what that means for your insurance coverage, that's a big part of it as well. If you know that certain medications aren't covered in a generic form, but they want brand name instead, then you can at least know going into it what's going to happen for your coverage and costs. If you want to go for the generic route, it's not covered that way, you can at least find out from your insurance what your coverage would be for that versus a cost of cash or going through the brand name, you can kind of look at that as well. So kind of keeping track of that is a process in and of itself. Insurance is fun, and there's a lot of information out there. It takes a while to sort through all those books. But all right, so this is a little sample label kind of to explain what we were talking about earlier. There's a little markings description right there saying it's a oval yellow tablet with a marking of SG and 153 in that product. Again, it gives you the name information, directions, etc. But this is usually on some part of the label on your prescription vial or package. This little green sticker is what you might usually see if we have a different manufacturer than last time as far as changing manufacturers go. Separate red sticker that says generically substituted if it's a new medication that came out as a generic now since last time. So, all right, so what can I do at home for patients? Being engaged in your healthcare is the biggest thing we want to help people understand. So knowing what medication you're taking, what strength you're taking, how you take it, is a really important thing to do for your sake and for also when you go to the hospital or clinic to visit with your providers as well, but also when you go to the pharmacy. knowing that there's a difference in product you're getting, or a different strength or a different dose you're getting instead this time around. If you know that's happening ahead of time, it makes it easier for the pharmacy as well. But if something changes, you're not expecting that too, that's where we want to ask questions as well. For generic medication specifically, if things look different, you can check that label first and see what that sticker tells you what it's supposed to look like and verify it's the same one, or give the pharmacy a call. Again, we're happy to take those phone calls all day long because we can take a look and see what that medication was supposed to be, see what our screen shows for a picture and kind of explain it to you what it looks like, and go from there. Being proactive is another thing that we appreciate in the pharmacy side. If you can call in ahead of time for any refills or when your insurance changes, or if you know you're getting a new insurance card fairly soon for coverage issues for those brand or generics, that's where we can say if we can get a head start in that process or filling it early, trying to manufacture is out of stock, or if a manufacturer has a recall issue, we can't get it in stock, you give us an extra day or two to get those products from a different supplier or a different manufacturer. So trying to be ahead of that curve so we're not scrambling at the last minute for you. Asking questions is key again. Verifying with the pharmacy. We'd rather take questions beforehand all day long than trying to investigate afterwards what was going on. It's easier, quicker, and helps to reduce any kind of concerns patients have as well. Communicating with the pharmacy team or providers. If you have a specific issue with a medication, let's say you had a product reaction to a certain manufacturer of a drug you had before, other manufacturers had no problems for you at all as far as those inactive ingredients are concerned, let the pharmacy team know that first off. Let your provider know that as well. And if you had those levothyroxine, warfarin, or anti-seizure medication issues, you can let them know which ones have worked for you or have not worked for you for manufacturers. And each of those manufacturers are listed on those labels too, so you can kind of know which one's which, or ask the pharmacy team which one was okay for you, which one didn't work for you. Pretty common thing to see. We're happy to help kind of navigate that water with you as well. So making sure they know what's going on at the pharmacy and the provider as well makes our lives easier. Learning about your insurance coverage. Again, you can look at your formulary. If you see any updates for your formulary for the new year, it makes a difference for understanding what's going to be covered and what wouldn't be covered. So you can keep an eye on that. It helps your sticker shock go down at the beginning of the year, or at least knowing what's going to come up for cost for you. Any questions today?